right, hello. In this video, we're going to talk about another type of CSS selector, another option to use in writing CSS selectors called pseudo-classes, which are kind of like CSS classes, but kind of not. They're pseudo-classes. So what we'll do is we'll talk about using pseudo-class selectors and how those works, and then we'll talk about we'll provide a little bit more detail on doing a specific example of using those for when we want to style hyperlinks and how we want that to work. All right, so a pseudo-class is a selector that's going to apply to an element based on its state or context, sort of how that element is actually being used. It's going to be distinct from something like a class selector or tag selector, which is looking at what the element is. This is going to be a little bit more about how the element is used in the context of the page. So pseudo-classes are written after a colon after another selector part. So for example, I might say I want to select anchor elements, but I don't want to select all anchor elements. I want to select specific ones. And so we can use a pseudo-class to say what kind of anchor elements do we want to pick. And then there's a number of different kinds of pseudo-classes that we can use. I'll sort of show you the list. I'll show you the list and we'll go through example. So there's a whole bunch of different kind of pseudo-classes, right? I've got a long list of these things. And again, you can see we scroll down for a long time. There's lots of different ways that we can sort through these. This is from Mozilla Developer Network, so you can sort of look up the details of how any individual one of these work. All right, so let's give an example. So and one of the more obvious examples is we could, for example, say that I want to style anchor elements that are being hovered over. So if you move the mouse over the anchor element, we want to change that element styling. Let's be something really obvious. Let's give it a font size to double its size. So we're going to make it go really big. I'm going to save that, refresh page. So now I have my anchor elements here. If I hover over them, they get big. So the rule here is saying, okay, style any anchor elements that are being hovered. At the moment, this element's being hovered. This one's now being hovered. Now this one's being hovered. So as I hover them over, they all get bigger, right? That rule is to apply. So that's kind of the most fundamental example of what these elements might look like. Other kinds of ones you might use, again, there are dozens of these things, and you can sort of look through that list if you find something that seems relevant. Other ones that I've found useful that I've actually used in practice. There is a last of type pseudo-class. So I could, for example, say, let's select any table, and there's my descendant selector again, tr. So any tr that's inside of a table, and any tr that is the last element of its type. So in my table, right, I've got a bunch of trs. We're going to select the one that's the last one in the list, right? The last tr, the last child that has that particular type, that is a tr as opposed to being something else. So this would basically select the last table row in our table, and I could give it a special border at the bottom because I want the bottom of my table to have a particular kind of border. I could use an nth of type selector to say select every nth, every second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever element of a type. So for example, this is one you write with a set of parentheses, and then you put sort of a formula inside of there for which ones you want to select. 2n is basically saying if you imagine counting 1, 2, 3, 4, anytime that has the format that looks like 2 times a number, so 2, 4, 6, 8, that gets selected. So in practice, this is going to select even numbered list items, right? We're going to select list items that are the second list item, the fourth list item, the fifth, sixth list item, etc., in its parent, right, in its section. So this would effectively style every other list item. And this is a good way of being able to say style a whole bunch of things without having to say add classes to every single one or to every other list item. We can just say, write a rule that applies to every other list item on the page. And it works, and that styles it. So yeah, those are really big examples. Like for example, I can show that in practice, right? I have my list here. I can say, let's style every other list item nth of type to n, or how about, well, actually, we'll do 2n. And I can say, let's give this a background color of yellow, because that'll be really obvious. And there, now it styles the second one. If I want to add a couple, I'm going to just add more links to the school homepage, longer. All right, style every other element simply by, again, saying let's style every other one. If I do something like 3n, it styles every third link on the page. And that's a pseudo selector, right? That's the syntax, and then sort of how you use them depends on what the pseudo selector is, and how do we figure out what it is and what it does? Well, we can go into our documentation and look up the details. I want to do a quick note about hover. Hover is really, it's fun, right? Like, that looks cool. That's kind of nice. I do want to flag, even though I used hover as my sort of first example from this, using hover, the hover pseudo selector on a web page is not a good idea and something you don't want to use. For a couple of reasons. Hovers are not accessible, right? A screen reader cannot hover. So any rules, any styling you're writing that are just going to be like appearance for hovering is not going to apply to screen readers. And so often if you're trying to be like, make that significant, like I want to make it so that this thing, when you hover over it, like changes some appearance or makes the sort of things become obvious or hidden or some way, it's not going to work for a screen reader. You want to make sure you're focusing on, like, when you're presenting your page, you want to make sure you're presenting in ways that screen reader will also be able to read. But more than that, right? Because again, screen readers are really just, CSS is just for appearance, which is fine. Hovers are not going to work on cell phones. They're not going to work on a mobile device. You can't, like, if you take your phone, right, and you like try to hover over it with your finger, you can't do that, right? You can't hover over, and you can't see it, right? But you can't hover over your phone because your phone won't detect when your finger is not touching it. So you can't do any hovering effects on a phone, and 70% of web pages in the world are accessed from a phone. So, like, your hover rule is not going to matter for anything. The other piece that really obvious effects from hover, like changing size, is actually provides a really difficult user experience, right? So like if I'm mousing over this and I'm like, okay, I want to move my mouse down to be able to get down to this like 340 number. Like when I try moving it, like suddenly it, if I'm trying to, as I'm trying to move my page, right, everything moves around. Like you see how suddenly like everything's jumped to the bottom. So what you'll find is that if you have hover effects, often it actually gets in the way where you try to move your mouse somewhere and suddenly like the page, something you've moused over something and suddenly it grows. So the thing you were trying to mouse to suddenly rotates down to a different part of the page. And now you need to move somewhere else, but then you move your mouse and now you've hovered over something else and that grows. And like, it gets really messy really fast, particularly when you're adding sizing changes, when you're adding, if you're trying to add underlines or paddings or margins, like those increase the size of the box. They're going to make things bigger. In general, hovers often don't produce nice effects. They tend to get, people try to be fancy with them. They end up getting messy and actually making it harder to use the page, make things less usable. So I generally don't recommend actually using hover, but it's a good example and it's fun, but don't use it. Right? It's not really that good. Okay, cool. And so that's the basics of, again, pseudo-classes. That's the general idea. The specific example I wanted to go through was how we then use pseudo-classes to style hyperlinks. So you'll notice that in my hyperlinks here, right, these got, oh my God, that's, see how annoying it is? There we go. So you'll notice that all my, like, these hyperlinks are all in purple because they've been visited. I've gone to the iSchool homepage on this browser, but this video I've never visited, that's why it's in blue. That's a standard default styling that comes with browsers, right, that your browser will give by default. We can customize that as we want. And we can do that by using pseudo-classes. So when we're styling hyperlinks, the first thing I want to note is that hyperlinks do come with their own styling, like the fact that this is purple and that this is blue. And if we just try to style a hyperlink, it doesn't always work, right? If I want to say, let's make these hyperlinks be blue, right? Like that does work that time, but occasionally you'll find that like hyperlink styling gets a little bit off. So you want to be a little bit careful with that. It's not always a problem. It generally works okay, but just sometimes, depending on what rules have been applied by your browser or by a spreadsheet, you might find that like you need to be a little bit more specific about hyperlinks in particular. And part of that is because hyperlinks can be customized based on using pseudo-classes based on their status. So for example, if I want to change it so instead of these unvisited links, make them blue, if I want to instead make them a different color, I can use a link styling to say, let's style any element that is an unvisited link. Let's give it a background color. We'll begin background colors of, how about green? We'll make it stand out a little bit. I'm gonna get rid of this guy because otherwise, right? Oh, hold on. That's supposed to be unvisited. Why did that work that way? Oh, so good example. I tried something, it didn't work the way I wanted, and so I'm not going to stop the video. I'm just going to go ahead and look. I want the link pseudo class. It has not yet been visited. Interesting. Certainly looks like it should have done that thing, right? You might have visited. Yeah, okay. Awkward. If I click on that and I come back, no, it's still doing that work. Interesting. So normally that's supposed to just say these are anchor elements that have not been visited. Okay. I'm not going to re-record the video. I'm just going to keep running because I don't want to have a system restored. And you can see that like sometimes the web doesn't work the way you expect. That's okay. In any case, I know this one should work, right? We can also use the visited pseudo class. Let's style links that have been visited. All right, let's try that one. So if I say, let's make my anchor elements that have been visited. Background. I'll give them background color. Let's make these ones have not. We'll call them red, and we're gonna make this one. Oh, how about light green? Is there a light red? Right. So there we go. Right. So the link that has not been visited are now green, and the link that has not been visited is red, and the links that have been visited are green. Great. All right. So you can see we can get those different color styling. If I then click on a link. All right, so it is. Oh, we're visited. It's already good. You know what? Let's yeah, we're good. Let's do it. All right. We can also add link style pseudo classes that will apply to links when they are what's called focused. Focus is going to be when you've sort of selected that element. You can see a bit here, a focus background color of this one yellow. You can see this happening if you try to use the tab key to like navigate through your page. You see how it outlines what I've currently selected. That's the element that currently has focus. So as I go through these, page so that you should be working, right? The one that's currently focused becomes yellow. Focus is a thing that actually exists in lots of browsers, right? This is the kind of thing where like I could have this window open, but I can, or no. Here, put some space here, right? I could have this window sort of in the front, right? That's the one that has focus, but I can still move and navigate, like scroll up and down through this window. But if I start typing, that typing would go inside of this window, right? That's where the typing occurs because that's the guy that has focus. So we talk about then anchor elements that have focus, right? We can also then apply to elements that are active. An activated link is one that has been, that activation happens when a user clicks on the link. So you can sort of see this if you're quick about it. So if we say click, let's do background color of white, maybe we'll make it sort of really odd, like maybe it makes it go away, right? So when I click on it, you see how now it's focused because I've been sort of clicking on it. It like as soon as I click on it to make it go, you can't even see it. It's really hard to see the sort of activating work. This will often happen with things like when you click on a link, someone will see it like flash one way or gets activated in some way. So that's the kind of thing that we can do. I'm pretty sure. Let me double check that it's activated. It is active. Yep. Cool. All right. This demo is kind of sucking. That's okay. So these are again the ways we can style different kinds of links based on how they're currently being used, if they've been visited, if they're not being visited, if they're selected, and so forth. And again, that's just a way of sort of customizing what your hyperlinks look like. In practice, you'll often want to do is you'll often want to say like, I just want my links to look like links, no matter whether someone's visited or not visited them. Like I don't care whether they like. I just want them always to be like a nice purple. I don't want them to or a nice blue. I don't want them to be changing like whether they've clicked or not, because that ends up causing kind of weird appearances. So often what we want to be using is using a group selector to say, let's apply to all these rules at once, right? Let's say, let's make links that are links, unvisited, visited, hovered, focused, active, whatever it is, links look like this. And we'll often do that by, again, writing sort of this giant single rule. I do want to note that when you're using these overrides, when you're using these pseudo classes, you do need to make sure that you apply them in the correct order. This is what happens is because when I'm clicking on an element, right, when I'm activating it, that's also giving it focus, which is also going to be changing whether it's visited or not. So all these rules are actually like possibly going to apply at the same time to the same element. So in order to make sure that our specificity matches out, or make sure that like we're actually applying the rules the way we want, you want to follow what is called the LVHFA order, which is link, visited, hover, focus, active. I often forget sort of this ordering as well. Generally, if I'm trying to make some links that look special, I'll go look up, right, what is the link pseudo class, the order for styling hyperlinks. Or as I said, I just try to make all links look the same way, no matter whether you click on or not. And I just copy and paste this and make this kind of thing work together. All right. So that's the basics of pseudo-classes and how you might apply them to hyperlinks. This is not super, I mean, this gets useful. And again, because hyperlinks are the most important part of a web page, because that's what makes it a web page, is it hyperlinks to other things. So styling those is often one of the more interesting places you can be able to modify how things look. But yeah, that's the basic idea of pseudo-classes. You can write them all together. Again, I do want to note though, like currently all my examples have just been using a tag and then a pseudo-class. Click. Why do you say click? Active. Maybe that's the problem. Click it. I did see go away. That's fine. It's totally possible to write a pseudo class that applies to a more complex selector. So for example, I could say, let's talk about the NAT anchors that are inside of the nav. We want those that have been visited to be blue. Right, we're going to style particular elements in a particular way. So in this case, I'm now combining my descendant selector with my pseudo class. If we sort of check out our rules for this, again, this is going to say apply to any anchor element who is visited by using that's inside of the nav to make that all work. Cool. So that's the basics of a pseudo class and for hyperlinks. So if you needed to then apply a pseudo class to something, that's how you do it.